Jono Brake here with another round of Monday Myth Check. This is number 12, and today we're going to talk about first mover advantage and why it needs to be checked to see if it's actually a myth. I've been in the startup world now for, 25 to 30 years, and one of the things I've noticed is this whole notion, particularly in the more of the disruption markets, we've got to be first to market, we've got to get the first mover advantage and all those sorts of things. And whilst I get it, I understand why that looks attractive, I've also seen it be a difficult journey. And I want to talk about three things today where first mover advantage may actually be a bit more of a challenge than you think it is. And so let's talk about those three things. The first one is the high cost of market education, okay? We always talked about when we were trying to be that first mover into market. I was involved in setting up some very early business management software online. And we talked about it a bit, but the challenge was actually educating the market. And so the market, whilst they understood the idea of the product, they didn't understand online as well. This was back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So the internet was kind of a newer deal then in terms of small business and business operations. And so what happened was we had to really do this whole education thing. And so first movers often have to spend a lot of their marketing budget on basically heavily educating the market, okay? Building awareness of the product, not just the brand, how it works, all that sort of stuff. Because what you're doing is you're actually shaping consumer behavior. Because if you're the first mover, that's what you've got to do. The second one is technology and product immaturity. Now, this was a big one for that deal. One of the things that was immature at the time was basic internet. This was the late 90s, early 2000s. Internet was on, if you're in a business, you may have had a 256K modem. Most of us were on 56K modems, and the 1 megabit ADSL internet was just starting to blossom, particularly in Australia where we were at the time. And so early products often have solutions that can be buggy, they are incomplete, they often don't know what the market wants anyway. And so what happens is, and we'll talk about this in terms of the action, is that the first followers observe those errors, observe those mistakes, and often leapfrog ahead because they're able to avoid all those pitfalls. They piggyback off the back that you've educated the market. So just you'll end up bearing a lot of the R&D burden and maybe not getting the reward that you want. The third thing is that there's no loyalty. There's no guarantee of customer loyalty is probably a better way to put it. So just being first doesn't mean that people are going to be loyal to you. Yes, you'll have your early adopters. Yes, you'll have your people who love the fact that you did that, love the fact that you did things that you did, and maybe hang around. But at the end of the day, if your product remains kind of buggy, or it remains a little bit laggy, or not as exciting as what the second person does, and certainly price points and all those sorts of things, it can be a real challenge. So your customer is only going to be loyal to a point, and they'll mainly be the early adopters. When you start to get into some of the mainstream kind of client base and you're starting to really scale, that's when the customers become less loyal because they haven't been part of that pioneer journey with you. So three things there to think about in terms of the Monday Myth Check for this week, that the first mover advantage might be a bit more of a myth than we thought it was. And what's the action? Let's talk about the second mover advantage, okay? So this is where, as the second mover, or at least a parallel mover, you can leverage market insights, you can study the first mover's missteps. Remember, we talked about that in terms of the product immaturity in the second myth. And so you can actually study the first mover's missteps, customer reviews, unmet expectations, and figure out how you provide a unique space in there. So just a few things to think about there as you begin to craft a product, as you're thinking about maybe going to market first for some reason, that there is a bit of a journey that doesn't guarantee that just because you're first to market, you're it. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be first to market, but just don't assume that you'll be it because you are. So, Monday Myth Check, number 12, first mover advantage. Let's check that one before we say that's what we got to do. I'm Jono Brake. As always, enjoy the journey.